Science shouldn't feel like a closed door. Welcome to Human Verified, your backstage pass to the world of high stakes research and the business of staying alive. My name is Gina Winchester, a Native American scientist, professor, author, and I've created this space where we swap dense academic jargon for fresh, no nonsense insights. Whether I'm deconstructing pharmaceutical breakthroughs, clinical trials, or the how this is legal side of STEM business, I'm here to bridge the gap between the lab bench and your daily life. It's rigorous research met with real world storytelling because understanding how science works is the ultimate power move. Going nuclear. Like I said, it's about that big energy. This week's discussion builds on several past Human Verified editorials and recent headlines surrounding uranium-based nuclear power. Between the conflict in Iran, which I covered in Big Energy, and talks between President Trump and Saudi Arabia regarding a domestic civilian nuclear program, atomic energy is front and center again. It's not just Saudi Arabia. The U.S. is currently pushing to increase its national nuclear capacity by 2050, backing up that goal with major technological milestones, plant restarts, and billions of dollars in federal support. In 2025, the Department of Energy focused on speeding up advanced reactor projects. Well, for obvious reasons, the increase in nuclear fission reliance is disturbing. Some key factors make this push different than those in the past. Much of today's energy push relies on miniaturizing nuclear reactors to something more manageable. We're looking for factory-built units that ship by truck or train for a much faster setup. They would fit into tighter spaces and use passive safety features, relying on basic physics like gravity to shut down without human help or backup power. And we've made some progress on this. Current compact designs generally come in 3 flavors. Small modular reactors, roughly the size of a 2-story house. They churn out 50 to 200 megawatts and are perfect for standard power grids or data hubs that hurt the environment. Microinfusion units shrink to the size of shipping containers, generating 1 to 20 megawatts for remote military bases or localized industrial heat. Finally, ultra-compact models, no bigger than a refrigerator, target niche roles like deep space travel or marine propulsion. The main catch is intense heat. Squeezing that kind of power into a tiny space creates thermal stress that would easily melt solid tungsten walls, leading engineers to use flowing liquid metal walls like lithium to absorb the radiation. On top of that, repurposing coal sites to handle uranium-based nuclear reactors is now a fad. By building modular reactors directly on retiring coal sites, developers are plugging into existing high-voltage grids, roads, and cooling systems. Some designs even hook right into the old coal plant steam turbines, keeping the existing hardware while swapping out the coal boiler. This approach preserves local economies by retraining coal plant electricians, welders, and engineers for nuclear operations. But domestic investments in advanced fuels like high-assay low-enriched uranium ultimately bring us back to the issue of enriching uranium at all. Uranium-based nuclear power generates low-carbon electricity, but it carries distinct environmental and safety challenges. Not to mention the hop, skip, and a jump it takes to make a nuclear weapon from the civilian enrichment industry. Then there is the fact that the waste stays radioactive for tens of thousands of years. Getting the fuel out of the ground leaves behind huge piles of radioactive tailings, which can leak radon gas into the air or wash heavy metals directly into local drinking water. And like the tragedy of Fukushima, Core meltdowns can occur when power cuts or disasters knock out cooling systems. Even in everyday operation, these facilities churn through unimaginable amounts of water, dumping heated runoff back into nearby rivers and damaging local aquatic ecosystems. But there are alternatives. Using uranium for nuclear fission has been around since the Manhattan Project. But for decades, the holy grail of atomic energy has been fusion. It's no longer science fiction. It's science fact. In this Human Verified editorial, I want to talk about fusion and why in the next 10 years, it'll upend the entire energy market, bringing about clean energy on a worldwide scale. All thanks to a breakthrough by a federally funded laboratory, solidifying once again that science is good business and we should bring back government-funded science. Once again, science is good business. The reason everyone is so hyped about fusion comes down to a few game-changing perks. For starters, unlike fission, it doesn't leave us stuck with thousands of years of hazardous radioactive waste. Instead, the main byproduct is just harmless helium. Plus, we basically never run out of fuel because the hydrogen isotopes we need can be pulled straight from ordinary seawater. And that is a very important point. Because fusion runs on seawater, we can tap into the massive oceans around us without draining the precious groundwater we need for drinking and farming. On top of that, a catastrophic meltdown is actually impossible. Fusion requires such perfect conditions to stay active that if anything goes wrong, the reaction just cools down and shuts itself off instantly. Think of fusion as bottling up the power of the sun. It works by crushing tiny hydrogen atoms under intense heat and pressure that they fuse together, kicking out a sun-level burst of energy in the process. For the longest time, this was just a dream. But the real turning point happened on December 5th, 2022. Researchers at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory finally did what everyone thought was impossible. They triggered a fusion reaction that produced a net energy gain. In other words, they got more power out of the reaction than the laser energy they used to start it. I can't stress enough how big a win this is for science. But don't expect fusion to power your toaster just yet. We're currently moving from cool physics to a brutal engineering reality. It's one thing to create a tiny artificial star for a fraction of a second in a lab. It's a whole different beast to build a power plant that can do this all day, every day, without melting into a puddle or breaking the electrical grid. Engineers are currently trying to tackle those hurdles and make this a commercial reality. And the engineering hurdles are predictably brutal. Standard metals simply can't hack it. They become brittle and radioactive under the constant bombardment of high-energy neutrons. We're essentially tasked with inventing entirely new superalloys or deploying liquid metal curtains to shield the reactor's core. Then there's the math of energy parity. It's one thing to get more out of the plasma than you put in. But a commercial plant has to generate enough surplus to power its own megamagnets, cooling loops, and electronics before it can contribute a single watt to your house. Yet the momentum is undeniable. We're already seeing working prototypes enter the testing phase, with the most ambitious firms aiming for grid-connected pilot plants within the decade. Physics has done its part by proving the concept. Now the clock is ticking on whether we can build a reliable industrial framework around a miniature star. Commercialization in the USA. We're watching data centers guzzle electricity at a rate that's honestly alarming. I've written before about how these hubs are sucking our water supply dry, and I've explored whether shrinking these centers down might actually help. But right now, the strain on our electrical grid is so intense that hyperscalers like Microsoft and Google are making desperate, unprecedented deals with nuclear fusion startups. And that's despite the fact that we don't even have a single operational commercial reactor yet. Still, with federal cash flowing, regulation loosening, and our national lab supercomputers crunching the numbers, domestic startups are sprinting to turn this old sci-fi dream into a real-world energy source. Take Commonwealth Fusion Systems, for example. This MIT spinoff has already pulled in nearly $3 billion, including a power purchase agreement with Google. Commonwealth Fusion is taking a clever shortcut by ditching the big buildings and focusing on magnets instead. These aren't your average magnets. They're twice as strong as anything we've seen before. By cranking up the magnetic power, they've managed to shrink their donut-shaped reactors down to about 1/40th the size of traditional designs without losing a single watt of power. Then you've got Helion Energy, which is taking a totally different path. With over $1.5 billion in the bank and a big money deal to start feeding power to Microsoft by 2028, they're playing for the W. Most power plants, nuclear or otherwise, work by heating up water to spin a giant steam turbine. Helion wants to cut out the middleman by bypassing the whole steam cycle to turn fusion directly into electricity. Now that $14 billion has flooded the industry as a whole, firms are betting on a different engineering horse to win the race against the laws of physics. For example, Pacific Fusion has pulled in more than $900 million to build reactors out of affordable, everyday electronic components that fire rapid pulses at tiny fuel capsules. Then there's Zap Energy, which uses electric currents to squeeze plasma inside a device small enough to fit on the back of a flatbed truck. And we can't forget TAE Technologies, which has attracted $1.2 billion to develop a hydrogen boron fuel mix. It's the cleanest option because it creates almost zero nuclear waste, though it requires us to master temperatures nearly 1 billion degrees. At this point, bringing commercial fusion into the US isn't just about hitting environmental targets. It's the economic opportunity of the future and a test of our national competitiveness. If our domestic startups can actually get these plants online, the payoff won't just be cleaner air. It'll be a complete overhaul of energy costs, a boost to high-tech manufacturing, and a much-needed win for national security. Fusion impacts your wallet in a good way. If we pull this off, the shift to fusion won't just change how we keep the lights on. It'll rewrite the rules of the energy market. Right now, we're at the mercy of fossil fuels like coal and natural gas, which are notorious for supply shocks and wild price swings every time there's a global conflict. We're seeing this right now with the war in Iran and the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I understand the need to revisit nuclear technology, but we need to learn from the sins of the past. And fusion creates that future where we can get an incredible amount of concentrated energy without the dangers of enriching uranium for any reason. And it's exactly what the heavy industry is starving for. We're talking about sectors like steel, cement, and glass. These are all industries that need the types of temperatures that renewables alone struggle to provide. By bringing fusion to these factories, we can slash carbon emissions without slowing down production. That same leftover heat can power proposed desalination plants to turn seawater into fresh drinking water or churn out affordable green hydrogen fuel. Launching a whole new fusion sector will trigger an economic ripple effect like we've never seen before. It will create a wave of high-paying jobs and a true domestic manufacturing overhaul. Since these reactors require incredibly precise, high-tech parts, we'll need an army of skilled workers. As we retire old fossil fuel plants, those electricians and engineers can transition into cutting-edge careers in robotics, cryogenic engineering, and plasma physics. Ultimately, whoever masters fusion first wins the global energy game and secures total energy independence. History shows us that influence follows energy. The nation that successfully rolls out modular fusion will own one of the most important technologies of the century and be in the driver's seat to export it to the rest of the world. China is looking to grid integration in the 2030s. We aren't the only players in the game, and China isn't just testing the waters with fusion. They're diving headfirst with an aggressive national strategy fueled by massive government backing. Instead of keeping fusion tucked away in quiet labs as a science experiment, the country has bridged the gap between researchers, private startups, and state giants. This unified approach allows them to move with incredible speed, turning complex physics into industrial scale hardware much faster than almost anyone on the global stage. China's push for fusion is built on the back of the experimental advanced superconducting tokamak, called EAST, their famous artificial sun in Hefei. It made waves worldwide when it managed to keep superheated plasma stable for over 1,000 seconds, or about 16 minutes. Now, they're already moving on to the next chapter with burning plasma experimental superconducting tokamaks, called BEST, a successor reactor they expect to finish by the late 2020s. To make this happen, Chinese engineers recently built and tested 500-ton superconducting magnets. Crucially, every part was made domestically, meaning they've essentially cut themselves loose from international suppliers. The end goal here is the China Fusion Engineering Test Reactor, the facility that's supposed to prove fusion can actually keep the lights on for a modern city. By aiming to generate its first electricity around 2030, China is trying to get a working plant online well before anyone else. With bottomless state funding, total control over their manufacturing, and a breakneck building pace, they've turned themselves into the front runner in the race against physics. Across the pond, the UK also has eyes on the 2030s. The UK and EU aren't sitting on the sidelines. They're mounting a serious challenge in the global fusion race. Britain's strategy is built around its spherical tokamak for energy production, the STEP program. And it's already taking shape at the retired coal-fired plant station in Nottinghamshire. Rather than sticking to traditional donut-shaped reactors, the UK is betting on a core Apple spherical design. This compact setup is engineered to compress magnetic fields more efficiently, aiming for a smaller, cheaper plant that can plug right into an existing grid infrastructures without missing a beat. What really sets the UK apart is its drive to treat fusion as a real-world industry. Managed by the UK Atomic Energy Authority, the government is actively recruiting major engineering partners. They're shoring up local supply chains and carving out clear, startup-friendly regulations that aren't bogged down by legacy nuclear rules. Centered around the Culham Research Centre in Oxfordshire, This approach has turned Britain into a hub for private investment and a prime contender for future technology exports. Japan and South Korea aim for 2035. Japan isn't just dipping its toes into fusion anymore. They've completely pivoted from academic curiosity to a full-blown sprint towards commercial power. Driven by a desperate need for energy security, the Japanese government has overhauled its national strategy to treat fusion as the next great commercial frontier. They're pumping into state funds and backing private players to build a domestic supply chain that can actually deliver electricity to the grid before their global rivals catch up. On the hardware side, Japan is home to the JT60SA. This collaboration with Europe has yielded the title of the world's largest operational tokamak. It's a beast of a machine and the ultimate playground for testing advanced plasma physics and high-intensity magnets. At the same time, researchers are betting on stellarators, using complex twisted magnets to keep superheated plasma stable without the sudden, frustrating flickers or shutdowns that plague similar designs. What I find most interesting is how Japanese companies are positioning themselves as the critical node of the fusion world. Instead of trying to build every power plant from scratch, startups like Kyoto Fusioneering are cornering the market on the critical guts of these machines, the heaters and heat exchangers that every reactor needs to function. By teaming up with developers like Helical Fusion, Japan is making sure that even if they aren't the first to the finish line, the rest of the world will still need their tech to keep the lights on. While the big players soak up the headlines, South Korea has quietly become the dark horse of the fusion race by choosing smart engineering over raw spending. Their crown jewel, the K-Star reactor, is essentially a high-tech furnace where scientists at the Korea Institute for Fusion Energy push the limits of what's possible. They recently stunned the world by holding a plasma reaction at a staggering 100 million degrees Celsius. That is literally 7 times hotter than the sun's core. And they held that reaction for a record 48 seconds. Now, they've got their sights on a 5-minute run, which is the magic number that proves a reactor can actually provide steady, reliable power to the grid. But South Korea isn't interested in just winning lab awards. They want a working industry. Backed by serious state funding, they've already mapped out a path for K-Demo, a pilot power plant aimed for the 2030s. They're even using real-time AI to babysit the temperamental plasma and partnering with private companies to design compact models that can actually be built to scale. By blending sci-fi style engineering with a clear-eyed plan for grid integration, South Korea has positioned itself to be the go-to exporter for commercial fusion the moment the switch is flipped. Germany looks to the 2030s and 2040s. While the rest of the world is placing bets, Germany is leading a European charge. To turn their lab wins into a real energy market, Germany dropped a €2 billion fusion action plan that runs through 2029. They've even cleared the red tape, choosing to regulate fusion under sensible radiation guidelines rather than the heavy-handed rules of legacy nuclear power. This business-friendly vibe has sparked a boom for local startups. Proxima Fusion, a spin-off from the world-renowned Max Planck Institute, is already sitting on a mountain of private cash to build grid-ready power stations by the 2030s. At the same time, players like Gauss Fusion, Marvel Fusion, and Focused Energy are busy designing full-scale plants and testing out new laser-powered techniques. By mixing advanced science with smart regulations and private funding, Germany is fast-tracking its way to hosting a groundbreaking commercial fusion demo by 2040. Then there is the mother of all global partnerships. Think the US, China, the EU, and Russia all at one table. ITER in southern France is basically the world's largest fusion think tank. The goal is simple, even if the execution is anything but. Give the world's fusion experts the information they need to make breakthroughs. To be clear, ITER isn't meant to actually hook up to the grid and power your house. It's a proving ground. By tackling the brutal engineering hurdles like managing insane heat and breeding its own fuel, the project is building the global supply chains and technical blueprints that every private startup is going to need. It's the foundation that the entire future of the industry is being built on. Science fiction to science fact takes a bunch of cash. Right now, the biggest thing standing in the way of fusion energy isn't the physics. It's cash, cash, cash. The real financial headache for the American fusion scene is the eye-watering cost of building those first pilot plants. Unlike software, where you can scale with a few clicks, building hardware at this level means heavy machinery, custom engineering, and materials that cost a small fortune. Startups have already pulled in billions from venture capitalists, but moving from a lab prototype to a working power station is going to take tens of billions more. This creates a gap for typical investors who usually want to see their money back in 5 to 7 years. Fusion needs patient investors who are willing to hang on through a decade or more of high-risk, grueling development. As that early funding starts to dry up, startups are entering a dangerous valley of death. They're scrambling to find hundreds of millions of dollars just to build demonstration units long before they ever see profits. Making matters worse, the US government isn't giving nearly as much backup as state-sponsored rivals like China. We need more federal support, and we must bring back government-funded science. Without it, China will beat us to the finish line and become the energy superpower in the world. The future of USA national security, energy independence, and global market share is on the line. It's time the government got back in the game. Circling back to previous Human Verified editorials. This editorial relates to so many Human Verified discussions we've had so far. Implications in I am not a robot, resistance is futile, and others is astonishing. But let me focus in on just 3 previous editorials and finish up by showing you how the race to commercialize nuclear fusion could change everything. Let's start with data is killing our water supply and draining electricity. Fundamentally, the quest for computational processing is causing us to rage over whether its technological benefits outweigh the severe costs to our communities. It all comes down to consumption. A single data center consumes a lot of power and water, making us question what makes sense going forward. The need for energy isn't being supported by clean resources. Instead, energy companies are going back to dirty techniques to meet data center power demands. But nuclear fusion could solve that problem, as its incorporation into everyday American use could propel the US's computational prowess into the future. It behooves me to bring up NVIDIA and its partners have solved the data center crisis. In that editorial, I talk about how chip giant NVIDIA, home builder PulteGroup, and smart energy startup Span are starting a decentralized network of mini data centers on American homes. Bringing in fusion, especially the SMRs, into the picture could mean that a small reactor powering a town might pair with solar power, battery backups, and mini data centers in our local neighborhoods, all of which would stabilize prices, bring energy independence, increase computational power, and put money right back into everyday Americans' wallets. And it all relates to science as good business. In this editorial, I walk you through the hyperscalers, NVIDIA, and 25 areas of science that have changed the future of humanity in 25 years. Incorporating nuclear fusion energy into the grid, the manufacturing, distribution, and innovation of any of these areas could broaden an already bright future of U.S. R&D. Nuclear fusion and its commercialization has the ability to change the future of humanity for centuries, and we are in the running. As I have shown you here, we are at the forefront of the race against physics, but China is not far behind. Private investment, government funding, and a shared vision of American energy independence are just what we need to make it over the finish line. Thank you for spending this time with me today.